Hi! Before talking about productivity, we need to know what is a production function. Consider this example. Imagine that you have a bar, and for that you hire some bartenders, you buy an ice machine, and of course, a lot of drinks. In order to produce what we call the output, which in this case is cocktails, right? This is the production function, something that relates input with output. Now, talking about productivity, imagine that this business is going really well, so that you want to hire an extra worker in the short run, because it's easier than to buy an ice machine. So, in order to hire this extra worker, remember, we need to think on a marginal way. So, let's calculate what we call as marginal productivity of labor. So, let's call it MPL, and basically it's the additional output, let's denote it with Y, over the additional amount of workers that you hire. So imagine that you hire an extra worker. In principle, you will have more output, but can this marginal productivity of labor be negative? Well, actually, if you have, for example, 2 bartenders, but you tell to one of them to teach the bartender that you hire, your output will decrease, because actually you will only have 1 bartender working in that night. So let's assume that instead of having the usually 140 cocktails per night, because one of the bartenders is teaching the new one, you can only produce 90 cocktails. Therefore, your marginal productivity of labor is minus 50. But you hire an extra worker for what? Is to increase the average productivity of labor. So let's see what scenarios do we have. Well, in the base scenario, we have 2 workers, 2 bartenders, that in terms of cocktails, they produce 140, and therefore the average productivity of labor is 140 over 2, which is 70. Now, in the bad scenario, that is, when you have to tell to one of the bartenders to teach the new one, you have 3 workers, but you only produce 90 cocktails in that night, so the average productivity of labor is 30. Therefore, with an extra worker, you have decreased the average productivity of labor. Let's see why this happened. So, in terms of marginal productivity of labor, in the second line, because it's when we have added a new worker, we have minus 50. And because the marginal productivity of labor was below the average productivity of labor, this one has decreased. Now, let's consider a good scenario. One in which you have 3 workers, but you hire a really good one bartender. And therefore, this bartender will increase the previous production of 140 cocktails to 240. So, on average, you have 80 cocktails per each bartender. Why? Because when you added this extra worker, the 3 bartenders are now producing 240 cocktails instead of 140, so the marginal productivity of labor is 100, and because this 100 is above the 70, the initial average productivity of labor, this one will increase with the new worker. So remember, in order to improve the finance of your business, you have to both think marginally, but ultimately you have to concentrate on the average productivity of labor.